Welcome back to Cheche. I'm sitting in again for Udwak Amimo. Again, we are discussing the remarks made by President Uhuru Kenyatta that organizations, that the foreign interests are funding non-governmental organizations with a view to influence the 2017 general election. On Twitter, Sir Rowling says the president spoke like he's not in charge. If we have rogue NGOs, have them deregistered. Nahashon Njoroge says, David Karatu says, Harun Dubi. Okay, so swiped at Harun Dubi. Harun Dubi is talking like just another businessman, ready to defend his business to the sky. Abdurrahman Ali says NGOs and civil society feel the big gap the government cannot reach. They do bring change to the society too. And Edward Kinuthia says they are looking for a campaign tool. Since they have nothing else this time they can cling on. I think he's talking about the government. Right. Let's go into this issue about when the president was making this remark, he said very clearly, and Mule has talked about it, and the dangers with that any funding that should come should go directly to the institutions if it's for civic education. Charles.
And I'm wondering, does IEBC in this case have the capacity to handle civic education, and would it guarantee non-partisanship, like he says, like Professor says?
I personally don't think, Prof comes in, I personally don't think that IEBC has the capacity to be able to run this show alone. And remember the number of responsibilities which have been bestowed upon IEBC, even in terms of campaign finance, regulations, ensuring that the early campaigns like what you're discussing right now, or what is happening right now in the electoral environment, is not happening. Now, for them to be able to be the only ones who can be able to discharge, they've been given the mandate to be able to come up with a curriculum in terms of the voter education, but in terms of the dispensation of the same, you need to bring in other actors who can be able to play, and I think that's where the civil society actually does some of the best work in terms of outreach to the communities.
Okay. Two points, Hussein. Point one, it's good to analyze where we are as a democracy in terms of our development. We are at institutional consolidation, institutional building. We moved from serious advocacy for democracy, serious advocacy for constitution. Now we have constitution, it is institution building. That's where not just IEBC, I think when we narrow down the organizations that can handle issues of civic education to IEBC, I think we are missing the point. It is all institutions that are involved in election. For example, we need to build the capacity of the police to be able to provide security, safety during election. That's part of civic education if you are to push the concept that way. So the target should not only be the voter, it is the totality of the people.
So do you think the funding should not go to these bodies?
Not to which bodies? It should
civil society organizations.
I think the second point, I can now come to the second point, is how should this money be dispensed? First, it should be declared publicly in the interest of openness. Us as the British, us as the Americans, us as South Africans, us as Botswanas, us as Ethiopians are giving support to Kenya's electoral system, 2 billion. And this is how we would enable Kenyans to access it. Put it in the papers that we are soliciting for proposals to do this and that. I don't think the government would fight with that. And if it were to fight with that, then it would be up against a huge current.
Would there be a problem with that?
There shouldn't be. What the government is saying is that this money has been given underhand, and it is going to selected groups whose agenda from the beginning the government has been suspicious about, rightly or wrongly. But the government is saying we've been suspicious of that. So we need a transparent, open process.
What will be the problem with that, Harun?
Yes.
The problem with that is this. Kenya is a member of the AU, for instance. And the AU Constitutive Act proposes to have an open democracy, an electoral system that is open and democratic, that is free of influence. And Kenya subscribed to that. Now, the election process is a 360-degree system that is so interdependent with each other, and I agree with Prof on the point that even policing ought to be capacitated. That you can now not talk about money as money, but as values I think we first needed to address what's the value system in a free and fair election. Once you are agreed on that value, then you can say what are the milestones in achieving all these values. You will have now voter education, civic education, security, information, and the management of the election itself, and many others. Once you are clear about those, what I'm calling milestones, then you can say, this particular milestone requires so much money and this is how it will be funded. These other civic education, we know that money will have to go to the human rights organizations or civil society organizations. That way, we will be honest with each other. But when the government says that we are not happy about those who are funding electoral organizations, other than the institutions, when we know that the institution, even the government itself, recently I was reading reports in the papers about the problem of consumption of even our budgetary allocations, that there is difficulty to consume the amount of money allocated by the treasury.
Right.
So this is, let us be clear.
That issue, and I think it's been talked about, and I want all your views on this, about auditing what these bodies get. That has been talked about before. What is said, I mean, if everything is done the way you're saying, the way you just said it, still, would you be okay? And yesterday we actually saw the majority leader saying they're going to recall Parliament, I think on the 20th of December. And one of the issues will be about having central bank, give information as to how much money such bodies are receiving and what they are being used for. Now, what he has talked about, if you're saying everything should be done the way you're saying, what he's talked about transparency and knowing ABCD is being funded and going to ABCD, will there be a problem with that?
I think that's something I must not lose.
Yes.
The intention, the object of discussing NGO civil society around elections is what? Because government itself gets funding from foreign organizations, foreign governments for security. We get for counterterrorism measures. Nobody, even that Aden Duale majority leader, has not asked the government to account for the money we get for security, security. Government itself to account. When the Auditor General points out to various gaps, they are the very first ones to oppose and fight that Auditor General and say you are wrong without giving authority.
And that is the wrong thing. What is the wrong thing?
My point is, if you went to these organizations today and asked for their audit reports, they are there.
I say that.
They exist. What the politicians, Aden Duale, even the president, are talking about is to try to poison the mind of the ordinary Kenyans that these organizations are not transparent. The NGO Coordination Board every year receives audit reports from every registered organization.
Actually, I wanted to just put this before Prof comes in. I just want to add the point. That's a point I wanted to make.
Yes.
That by regulation, all civil societies are required to account to the NGO Coordination Board.
Right.
And they also do conduct independent audits with reputable firms, and this is open for public consumption. And furthermore, there's also the other aspect of, I think you talked about, Prof was talking about that the British need to declare, how much they're giving out. The call for proposals are always done in public.
In newspapers.
In newspapers. The British will say this is the amount we are allocated for election assistance, and we are calling on organizations which are interested. So this is always in public. Yeah, they do that, it's always in the public domain. It's there, Prof.
Let's be honest to ourselves. The money we are talking about is never disclosed. It's not neither here. I mean, we sometimes localize these things to ourselves. In South Africa, because my organization is registered in South Africa.
You are a foreign agent.
In South Africa.
We are Pan-African.
But foreign.
Yeah, we are.
Make your point.
I was called here as an expert to guide you on some of these wayward things. But let me say this. There, you are not asked to audit is automatic. And you are given a tax relief because you are non-tax paying. You are given a tax relief, so it is your obligation to be audited by the government automatically. It's not about another body outside the government called the NGO Coordination, and it is that. And you are audited in two ways. One, where did you get your money
by
from?
The government, you're saying?
Yes, by the relevant bodies. not the government, the relevant bodies. Let's not confuse the executive.
You said the government.
Yes. And you are registered.
So relevant bodies within the government.
Within the government.
Okay.
And you are registered. You are registered as a company, but designated as a non-profit making organization. And constitutionally, then it is laid out what your tax obligations are, what your other obligations are. And one of the obligations is where you get your money from. You declare that. And the person who gave you, so that if it is a transfer, for example, a foreign exchange transfer, you have to go to central bank and explain where this one is coming from.
Is that any different?
The point, no, I'm telling you what we do. I mean, telling you what we do. I'm not talking about other examples. I have worked with NGOs from the US and other places.
Okay, is that
the right thing to do? The issue we are discussing here, and the issue that the president was raising was about the transparency.
So is that the right thing to do? What you just said, that example you've given.
Yes, first the donors declare what they are giving Kenya, because they are doing it in the goodwill of Kenya. For example, they will go in and say, we are giving so much development assistance, and they, like, for example, you know what they are giving to support the budget. They do, what they are doing, and so on. So
let's help.
Okay. Isn't that the practice in Kenya? Is it any different? And if it's different, whose responsibility is it to ensure we have that kind of system?
It is. That is what the debate about the Public Benefits Act was all about. I was an expert for the parliament in there, and we had a huge debate.
Prof, there is a lot of
people say you want now to emasculate civil society by demanding that they
be such a danger. That's the thing.
No.
Why not?
Because you are not prevented from soliciting your funds from local and international. Nobody is telling you not to solicit the funds. But in the interest of transparency,
they were giving up 15%.
15% actually.
That was a
limit to foreign funding.
The government decides you have to repropose against the government.
Let's also look at the lacunas, because in talking, looking at this in a narrow way, we are depriving ourselves of benefits and lessons from other countries. When South Africa put those kind of limitations, they also did something else which Kenya government is not doing and which it intended to do. They created the Renaissance Fund. The Renaissance Fund supports organizations, civic organizations and others, to promote the national agenda, whether it is transparency in elections, civic education or whatever you want to call it, which constitute which you apply from the government as a citizen.
I think
you see, so there is local money which local organization can get, and there is also a portion of international money which comes in, but it comes in transparently when the government is aware.
Okay, there are two things here. One is the president and the government, or whoever speaks for them, has not shown the lack of transparency or opaqueness in terms of the money that comes to civil society organizations. So they are throwing a cloud of doubt without explaining that me as the president of Kenya, Uhuru Kenyatta, I know that organization such and such, that's what you were saying, has received this money for this agenda, and this agenda is not a good one.
Who funded Okoa Kenya?
Subra. The second thing I want to say, and I think it's important that it be said, is that the president must speak the language he believes in. And I'm assuming that he supports the institutions such as IEBC, he said, that should receive this funding. IEBC in its regulations has said illegal campaigns cannot be allowed to begin before the timelines that they have stated and they have been published. Now, the opposition, as well as
the Jubilee Party
are campaigning. In fact, when Jubilee was launched, whenever I go to my village, I see billboards with the president and his deputy with their handshake, their famous handshake, all over the highways. The president should support IEBC to bring down those billboards, both for opposition and for themselves, because sanctions must come to those who are campaigning. And that's the value we see in terms of being honest to the word and the law. But you cannot come and address people and say civil society organizations are doing ABC, move them to the Ministry of Interior where they will be policed more than regulated, and then on the other hand permit yourselves to do the things that IEBC is mandated to condemn. So there is and this is where I would agree with Prof, that there is a huge measure of dishonesty in the management of Kenyan politics, that it is difficult for citizens to see what really is the issue.
Okay.
Like this question of funding of NGOs that relate to do with governance and elections, that is a very, very small sector of our society that should not concern the president to make a huge statement and cause such a debt.
The professor has asked a question which we need to look at. He asked who funded Okoa Kenya. Suppose a foreign country or a foreign institution funded Okoa Kenya. What's wrong with that?
What's wrong with the Communist Party of China funding Jubilee?
Maybe Professor will tell us where he was headed to.
No. We are saying that there is underhand money that is finding its way into our politics. Whether Jubilee is getting it, or CORD, or any other formation is getting it, when we are talking about transparency in our system.
Right.
And I say that this level of our democracy, our responsibility is to consolidate not just our democracy but shared values.
So are you alluding to the fact that Okoa Kenya got money through underhand deals?
I'm not alluding. I know I can write.
To conclude, we'll make it as a conclusion. As a concluding remark, and I'll think it's important here to say. I mean, it's a fact, and we all know the relationship between the civil society and this specific government has not been very good. So as we wind up, because both of them are supposed to serve the same wananchi at the end of the day.
Right.
How do we get out of this? I'll start with you, Mutegi.
I think the government or the president, if you talked the other day as a candidate on a national day, which is wrong, just like they did in Meru, they went with the uniforms on a national day. It is wrong to try and limit what we gained, because they are taking us back. The government is taking us back from where you are. That kind of panic and getting dictatorial, which I think is wrong. It should be open.
Okay. Charles, I'll come to you.
It's important that we stop doublespeak. One thing that is coming out clear from where I see it is there's a lot of doublespeak, both in the civil society,
both sides,
who say there are rogue, civil societies that operate in illegal ways, and there are those that are doing a genuine work. But then they condemn the president when he says there are people who are getting money to do bad things. On the part of the presidency and the government, I think we also need to stop doublespeak. Like Wakili said, we should practice what we preach, rather than public gimmicks, trying to look for excuses ahead of an election. And I will take from this discussion a very important statement made by Professor. The timing of this. Did this funding start the other day? I mean,
it's been happening.
Is it becoming a campaign issue?
Okay, Prof.
I think my recommendation would be to civil society first to clean its house, so that you get rid of rogue civil society organizations that are political agenda, are deep in the advisory committees and think tanks of political parties, and are still claiming to be occupying that neutral place called civil society. If I, Peter Kagwanja, join government, I declare in public and say I have become an advisor to the president, I have become an advisor to this. That declaration is universal. You need to make that so that people deal with you as such. The second point is to the donors. There's nothing wrong in supporting democracy anywhere in the world. We are living in a globalized world. The point is, can you do it transparently and in open? You can advertise and let Kenyans know that is happening. Finally, to the government, as we talk about regulating or seeking transparency in the access to funds, we must also make funds accessible to our civil society organizations through what other organizations have done. Every country in the world has its own agency. DFID, USID, Renaissance Fund for South Africa. Kenya is now of age to have its own agency to fund its own civil society. And perhaps 1 year, possibly 2032, you can say we no longer need external funding because we are capable of funding our civil society organizations.
Very well. I think the president has not stopped fighting governance and human rights organizations since his perceived or perception that these organizations took him to the ICC. My advice to him, he should stop and reflect and see that these organizations are made up of individuals who are Kenyans, and we don't need to agree to be good citizens. We can agree and disagree, yet be good citizens of this country. Two, in terms of foreign funding, or what Professor is calling underhand funding, I would like Kenyans to start looking at underhand funding of politics in Kenya through looting from Afia House, NYS, SGR, Eurobond, and others. Those are monies that are being looted by people in government to fund elections, and that to the president may not seem as if it is wrong, but when money comes from outside to create and build capacity, it cannot be wrong. Okay. To the donors and civil society organizations, I think it's important to be open and transparent in terms of people knowing, but it is important also for people to seek information and get it. The laziness with which I see us talking without seeking the information that is publicly available, and we start amplifying it as if it didn't exist, is really appalling.
Okay. Mullah, maybe you should help us.
Yeah, I'm thinking...
Your experience as an election observer. I mean,
yeah, first, of course, openness and transparency is key principles for any electoral process. And I think everybody here agrees. So there's no problem in making the funding and other issues and the activities of the civil society public and open.
Okay.
Nothing wrong with that. My only issue is that, first, there are legal frameworks which are currently operating, and all civil societies in this country are regulated, and there are mechanisms of addressing any issue that goes against the grain of the documents that they lodge with the government or the regulating authority. I think that ought to be, and as Wakili says, I mean, that source of information can be got. You can get that information. My problem, and where I sit right now, is that I'm seeing us befuddling an electoral environment which is already clouded with so many issues. Now, when you start speaking about civic education and a key component of the election, 8 months to the election, and attacking or having a go at organizations which are providing this, for me it creates a very bad environment already. And I think moving forward we need to sober up as a nation and discuss these issues openly. I think the civil society have their role to play, IEBC has their role to play, the government as a facilitator of the process has a role to play. We need just to do it very soberly.
All right, that is Mullah Musau, the National Coordinator, Election Observation Group. Professor Kagwanja Peter is the CEO, African Policy Institute and consultant for